He was just a struggling single dad looking for a job, until he sat in the wrong interview room and heard a woman say, "I've been waiting since 2010. What happened next changed everything. If you believe in second chances, quiet heroes, and the kind of love that heals, this is a story you won't forget. Tap like if it already caught your heart. Subscribe to stay for every story that reminds us it's never too late to begin again. The rain was steady and mean. None of that gentle tapping nonsense. This was the kind that soaked you in seconds, cut through layers, and reminded you how cold the world could really be. Ethan Moore stepped out of his truck with the same weight he'd been carrying for 13 years. His boots hit the wet pavement with a tired slap, and he clutched the weather-warped folder to his chest as though it could keep him from unraveling. Inside the folder, a resume printed at the town library, a copy of his expired certification, and a crayon drawing from his daughter that simply read, "You got this, Dad." The building wasn't much, just 2 stories of old red brick, softened at the corners by time and rain. A wooden sign above the glass door read, "Bennett Design and Crafts, honoring wood and the stories it holds." He muttered under his breath, "Let's hope they don't ask too many questions." Ethan wasn't here to dream. He wasn't here to rebuild a life. He just needed a job. Something to pay the rent on the tiny trailer he and his daughter Emma called home. Something to buy groceries that didn't come with expiration dates already passed. He stepped into the lobby. Warm air hit his face like a sigh. The scent of cedar and cinnamon clung to the air, mingled with the faintest trace of smoke, like someone had recently burned the edge of a log just to remember what it meant to survive fire. A handwritten sign was taped to a wooden easel near the entrance. "Interviews, maintenance position, room 2. Ethan glanced down the hall. 2 rooms, opposite ends. He saw one open, light spilling out warmly. A woman inside stood with her back to the door, adjusting a picture frame on the wall. Maybe that was room 2. He stepped in. The floor creaked beneath his boots. She turned, and the world fell quiet. Claire. He hadn't seen her in 13 years. Not since before the fire, before the funeral, before he disappeared without a word. Her hair was shorter now, pulled back in a neat twist. She wore earth tones, soft browns and grays, but there was nothing muted about her presence. She stood like someone who had learned how to rebuild from rubble. She looked right at him. Not shocked, not angry, not afraid. Just still. On the desk behind her, a laptop screen glowed faintly. His name was on it, Ethan Moore. 2:30 p.m., he blinked. I think I'm in the wrong room. I'm here for the maintenance position." Claire didn't move. Her voice came soft and steady. "You're not in the wrong room." He swallowed. Something caught in his throat, the weight of all the years that had passed pressing in like the rain on his shoulders. And then she said it. "I've been waiting since 2010. Ethan stepped back like he'd been struck. But the wall was right there behind him, and he leaned against it for balance because right now he wasn't sure he had any left. 2010. The year everything burned. The year he buried his wife. The year he walked away from Claire without a goodbye. His fingers curled against the soaked fabric of his shirt. Claire, the name escaped like a secret finally remembered. She nodded once. That was all. No accusations. No flood of questions. Just a look in her eyes. Quiet, familiar, and heavy with everything they'd left unsaid. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "You started a business?" Claire moved slowly to the desk. "In 2012, built it from scraps mostly. Local timber, old barnwood." Her hand rested on a small box made of maple and brass. The idea was to give broken pieces a second life. He managed a brittle smile. "Sounds like you." She looked up at him again, and for a moment, Ethan wasn't standing in a strange room. He was 28, back in that little apartment above the bakery, drawing house plans on napkins while she played music in the kitchen. Before the world went sideways. "I came today for a job," he said, his voice rough. "I didn't expect this." Claire tilted her head. Why now? He hesitated, then pulled something from the folder. Not his resume, not the certificate. It was Emma's drawing. 3 stick figures, one tall, one medium, one small, hand in hand, under a crooked roof. A sun beamed down from the corner, smiling wide. She asked me yesterday if anyone used to. Wait for me, Ethan said, voice thin. I didn't have an answer. Claire stared at the drawing for a long time. Then without a word, she opened a drawer and pulled out a small palm-sized wooden tile. She slid it across the desk to him. One word was carved in it, delicate but deep. Begin. He sat down. Not because he was ready, not because he had answers, but because this time, for the first time in years, there was something heavier than regret. Hope. It didn't speak loudly. It whispered, like rain on a warm rooftop, like firelight inside an old kitchen, like the weight of a wooden chair that hadn't collapsed despite the years. Ethan looked up, met her eyes, and gave the faintest nod. Maybe, just maybe, some doors weren't wrong. They were just late. The next morning, Ethan stood outside the workshop door holding a thermos of gas station coffee that had long gone cold. He'd barely slept. Not because the bed at the trailer was uncomfortable, it was, always had been, but because Claire's words kept replaying in his mind, soft and impossible to ignore. I've been waiting since 2010. He'd thought she might have hated him, or at least wished him away like a bad dream. But she didn't look at him like someone angry. She looked at him like someone who had kept a candle burning, even when there was no promise of return. Ethan wasn't sure what to do with that. The door creaked open, not locked. He stepped inside. The space smelled of sawdust and oil. Wood shavings curled on the floor like sleeping cats. Sunlight filtered in through old paned windows, slanting across worn benches and shelves lined with chisels, mallets, and clamps. The whole room hummed with the silence of things waiting to become something else. Claire had left a note on the table. Start with the broken-legged bench by the back wall, and no rush. Some things aren't meant to be fixed fast. See. Ethan stared at the handwriting. Still the same. Neat, but with a curl at the end of each line, like a thread being gently tied off. He took off his jacket, rolled up his sleeves, and walked to the bench. 3 legs solid, the 4th cracked clean through. A split from moisture. Maybe time. Maybe both. He ran his hand along the grain. The wood was still strong underneath, still warm. Like people, it just needed pressure in the right direction, not force. He didn't hear Claire come in, but suddenly she was there, standing a few feet away, a cup of coffee in her hands. You used to hum when you worked, she said softly. Ethan looked up. Claire offered a small smile. In that apartment above the bakery, you'd sit on the floor with scraps of wood and a toolbox you barely knew how to use, but you'd hum like you were building a cathedral. He didn't know what to say, so he shrugged. Maybe I forgot. How? Claire stepped closer. You didn't forget. You just stopped believing there was something worth building for. Her words landed like tools dropped gently onto a workbench. No noise, but all weight. They sat in silence while he worked. She sipped coffee. He found the right dowel and began sanding. His hands remembered even when his heart didn't. Was married, he said suddenly, his voice low. You probably knew that. Claire didn't flinch. I did. She was good, sweet. We had a daughter, Emma. Claire nodded. She the one who drew that picture? He paused. Yeah. She's lucky, Claire said. Not every man who breaks knows how to keep showing up. Ethan looked at her. I didn't show up for you. Claire tilted her head. You did. Just not then. Silence settled again. Not heavy. Just real. He turned the bench leg in his hand. The crack ran deep, but not beyond repair. You know, he said, quieter now. When the fire happened, everything just stopped. I lost her, lost the house. Then the company pulled my license. Said the wiring was my fault. Claire's eyes didn't change. She just listened. I couldn't face anyone, he said. Not my family, not my friends, not you. I thought if I stayed away long enough, I'd eventually disappear. And did you? No? His voice cracked. Turns out pain doesn't forget you just because you disappear. Claire didn't speak, but she reached out and placed something on the table beside him. A small wooden tile. Another one. This, one red, still. Ethan touched it, thumb brushing the grain. You made these? She nodded. Started in the first year after you left. I couldn't sleep much, so I carved words I needed to hear. What did still mean? That I was still here, she said quietly. Still waiting, still breathing, still hoping I hadn't imagined you. He looked at her then. Really looked. The lines around her eyes were new. So was the quiet steel in her posture. But the kindness? That was old. That was hers. I'm not asking for anything, Ethan said finally. Not forgiveness. Not a place. Claire stood, walked to the window. Her voice floated back like light between trees. What if I'm not offering anything? What if I'm just here too? By noon, the bench stood balanced again. A temporary clamp holding the new leg in place. Ethan wiped his hands on a rag. His knuckles were rough, calloused, but they no longer shook. Claire returned with a sandwich and a glass of water. He thanked her. She didn't say, "You're welcome." She just sat beside him, like old times, like something broken that didn't mind being seen while it was still halfway mended. Ethan took a bite. Bread, turkey, mayo. Not fancy, but solid, like everything else she'd ever done. Claire, he said, chewing slowly. Why did you wait? She looked at him. Not surprised. Not offended. Just honest. Because I never believed that you stopped loving, she said. I just believed. You forgot how to let it live. Outside, the rain had stopped. Inside, a bench stood balanced again. And Ethan, for the first time in 13 years, didn't want to leave the room. The sun dipped low behind the tree line, casting long shadows. Across the back lot of Bennett Design and Crafts, the rain had left puddles and the air smelled of wet leaves, sawdust, and the faint, lingering smoke of a neighbor's wood stove. Ethan stood by the open garage door of the workshop, rubbing his sore shoulder. It had been years since he used his hands like this, not just to survive, but to make something. Real work. Purposeful work. Inside, the repaired bench sat drying, clamped tight, waiting for morning. He didn't want to go home yet. Long day? Claire's voice came from behind him. She was holding 2 mugs, one steaming, one empty. Ethan gave a small nod. Not used to standing still this long without breaking something. She smiled, handing him the steaming mug. Chamomile, not coffee. Not tea, just warm. You did good today, she said. The benches never stood so straight. He let out a soft exhale. Not quite laughter, not quite disbelief. Just the sound of a man who hadn't been told in a long time that something he did mattered. They sat on the back steps, their shoulders close but not quite touching. The light from the workshop spilled behind them like a quiet promise, and the wind carried the scent of pine and cold air. Claire sipped from her mug, watching a squirrel dart along the fence line. You ever miss building houses? She asked. All the time, Ethan said. But I think I miss the feeling more than the job. What feeling? That I was part of something that might last? Claire didn't reply right away. When she did, her voice was quieter than the wind. I used to think that too. That permanence was the goal. Turns out, things that last aren't always the things we thought we built for forever. He turned his head toward her, studying the curve of her jaw, the strength in it. She wasn't the same woman he left. She was sharper now, firmer. But the warmth hadn't left her. It had just buried itself deeper. You built this place, he said, motioning toward the workshop behind them. It lasted. Claire gave a soft smile. I built it out of what I had left. Silence settled over them again. Not awkward, just full. After a while, Claire stood. You hungry? Ethan hesitated. He should have said no. He should have gone back to the trailer, reheated a can of soup, and slept in the narrow cot Emma called Dad's corner. But something about the question, not what she asked, but how she asked it, felt like more than politeness. Yeah, he said. I could eat. The kitchen was warm, small, and lived in. Faded tiles, a chipped kettle, a ceramic jar, labeled flour in handwriting that looked like a child's. There were photos pinned to the fridge, drawings too, mostly of a little girl with curly brown hair. She's yours? Ethan asked, nodding toward the fridge. Claire nodded. Lucy, she's 5, smart, shy, loves dinosaurs. She know I'm here? Claire's eyes flickered. She knows someone new is helping with the wood. That's all for now. That's fair. They didn't speak again for a while. Just the clink of cutlery, the bubbling of soup, the hum of the refrigerator old enough to rattle with every shift in temperature. Claire served 2 bowls of stew, thick with beans, carrots, and leftover roast. She handed him a spoon, then sat across from him at the small wooden table. Built this one too, she said, tapping the tabletop. First thing I ever made with my own 2 hands. Ethan ran his fingers along the edge. He could see the imperfections, a slight tilt, a nick in the surface, but it stood solid. Honest. Like her. Funny thing, Claire added, I didn't know anything about building. Just knew I needed something that didn't collapse under me. Ethan nodded slowly. I know that feeling. They ate in silence, but not in distance. He noticed how Claire's eyes softened whenever she glanced at the hallway, the one that must have led to Lucy's room. How she folded her napkin carefully like it was a habit learned in the absence of noise. How she looked at him, not with suspicion, not with invitation, but with a kind of waiting, not for a response. For the truth, so he gave her one. I sleep on a cot, he said. In a 1-room trailer. Emma and I share the space. She has the bed, I have the corner. Claire didn't react the way others had. No pity, no forced encouragement, just, she lucky to have you. He blinked, surprised. You don't even know what kind of father I am. You showed up here with her drawing in your pocket, Claire said. That tells me enough. After dinner, Claire walked him to the porch. The air had turned crisp. Above them, stars peeked through thinning clouds. I can come back tomorrow, Ethan said. You don't need to ask. He nodded, and just as he turned to leave, Claire said, Ethan? He looked back. If you ever get tired of soup and silence, I've got extra chairs. He smiled, not wide, not certain, but real. Thanks, he said. Then he stepped down the porch stairs, and for the first time in a long time, it felt less like walking away and more like carrying something home. The next morning, Ethan arrived early. Too early, the kind of early that suggested he'd barely slept, and didn't want to be alone with what his mind did in the silence. The workshop was still dark, dew clinging to the windows. He stood in the gravel lot sipping coffee from a paper cup, watching his own breath drift away in the cold. Somewhere inside, a heater kicked on with a low, rumbling groan. Claire's truck wasn't in the lot yet. He'd beaten her there. That surprised him. He wasn't used to being first anymore, in anything. He let himself into the shop, turned on a single lamp, and sat beside the half-finished cabinet they'd started yesterday. He rubbed the heel of his hand across the wood grain. It had a crack in it, right down the center panel. Nothing dramatic, just a stress line barely visible in the right light. But he could feel it, like the boards had shifted under weight they weren't built to bear. He knew the feeling. Claire arrived 20 minutes later, pushing the door open with her hip and carrying a paper bag in each hand. You beat me, she said, a little winded. Either you're eager or you slept like hell. He gave her a sideways glance. I plead the fifth. She set the bags on the work table, pulled out 2 foil-wrapped muffins and a thermos. Blueberry, and the good kind, not the grocery store sugar bricks. He accepted it with a nod of thanks, unwrapped the muffin slowly, like it might vanish if he wasn't careful. Claire poured them both a cup of coffee from the thermos. The smell filled the room like something warm crawling in from the edges. "You okay?" she asked after a while, leaning against the table. Ethan took a sip, staring down at the cracked panel. "Define okay." "Not in pain, not lost, not waking up with someone else's voice in your head." He paused, looked at her. "You say that like you've been there." "I have." She didn't elaborate. Neither did he. Mid-morning, a small pair of footsteps approached the shop. Claire's posture changed, subtly but immediately. Her back straightened, her eyes softened, her shoulders shifted forward like she was preparing to shield someone smaller. "Hey, Lucy," she called gently. Ethan turned just as a little girl peeked into the shop. Brown curls, green coat, a stuffed dinosaur tucked under her arm. She looked maybe 5 with wide, cautious eyes. "This is Mr. Ethan," Claire said. "He's helping Mommy fix some things." Lucy said nothing, just looked at him, studied him. Ethan raised a hand and waved. Not too big, not too close. "Hey there." She didn't wave back, just held the dinosaur tighter and stepped behind her mother's leg. "She takes a while," Claire said apologetically. "No rush," Ethan said. "Some things aren't meant to be fixed fast." Claire gave him a look, not a smile exactly, but something warmer, something understanding. Later that afternoon, while sanding down a warped table leg, Ethan finally spoke. "I should have told you," he said. Claire didn't look up from her notebook. "Told me what?" "About Emma. About my wife. About everything that happened back then." Claire closed the notebook, folded her hands. "She was pregnant," Ethan said. "That day I didn't call you back. We found out. It changed everything. I thought I had to grow up. Fast. Walk away from anyone who reminded me of the kid I used to be. And I reminded you of that?" He nodded. "You reminded me of peace, of dreaming. I didn't think I'd earn either of those again." Claire looked at him for a long time. Then she stood, walked over, and placed her hand gently on the table leg he was sanding. "You don't have to explain," she said. "But if it helps..." I didn't wait for an apology. Ethan's hand stilled. "I waited," she continued, "because the part of you I knew, the part who carved our initials into that fence post behind the bakery, he wasn't gone. He was just buried." He looked up at her. "Maybe he still is," he said quietly. "I don't know if I can be that man again." Claire's voice didn't waver. "You don't have to be him. You just have to be the man standing here now." That night, Claire invited him in for supper again. This time, Lucy sat at the table, still silent, still guarded, but present. Claire served spaghetti, and Ethan helped pour water into cups shaped like dinosaurs. Midway through the meal, Lucy reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a crumpled drawing. She slid it across the table to Ethan without a word. 3 figures, 1 tall, 1 medium, 1 small, all holding hands. Above them, a sun with a wide grin and a tree with big green leaves. Ethan's heart caught. He looked up at Claire. She watched. "You work," she said softly. "She doesn't draw just anyone." He studied the drawing again. The tree in it wasn't one he recognized. Not from the yard, not from memory, but maybe it wasn't from the past. Maybe it was something still waiting to grow. The wind was sharp that morning, cutting across the valley and scraping dry leaves into quiet spirals along the gravel road. Ethan pulled his coat tighter as he walked up the path to the workshop, his breath clouding before him. The sun hadn't quite cleared the ridgeline yet, and the sky was still that winter blue-gray, the color of things waiting to wake. He carried with him a thermos, of hot chocolate, not coffee, and a bag of cinnamon raisin toast he'd made at the trailer. Emma had helped. She'd insisted he bring enough for the lady and the little dinosaur girl. The toast was a peace offering, he supposed, or maybe just something that felt like home. Claire opened the door before he knocked. "She's all ready. Drawing?" she said with a tilt of her head toward the kitchen. "You're early." He held up the toast like a flag. "Bribery. Works better than apologies sometimes." Claire laughed softly, stepped aside. Lucy sat at the table, cross-legged, on a chair too tall for her. A colored pencil was tucked behind one ear, and a piece of paper in front of her was half filled with trees. Big, lopsided, messy trees. When she saw him, she froze, then looked at the bag in his hand. He placed it carefully on the table and stepped back, letting her choose to come closer. She did. One small hand reached in, pulled out a triangle of toast, and without a word, she began chewing. Claire gave him a subtle nod, the kind of look parents exchanged when something hard just became a little easier. Later that day, Ethan was working in the back storage room, reorganizing a shelf of old tools. He liked the weight of them, the way they sat in his hand like they'd been waiting for someone who knew how to use them again. Claire walked in, rubbing her arms. "Heating's acting up again. We'll need to check the vent above the workroom." "I can take a look," Ethan offered. She hesitated. "It's in the attic." He nodded. "Still okay." She hesitated again. "It's connected to the old loft." That gave him pause. The loft. The place she once used as a guest space. He remembered, vaguely, her talking about fixing it up years ago. A couch, a little desk, books stacked too deep. "Is someone using it?" he asked. Claire looked at him evenly. "Not yet." A beat of silence passed between them. Then she added gently, "There's a space heater, a small cot, if it helps, I mean. If you ever get tired of trailers and cold nights." Ethan's jaw worked, but no words came at first. Then, "You're offering me a room?" "I'm offering you warmth," she said. "The rest is up to you." That evening, Ethan moved into the loft above the workshop. It wasn't much, a single window, a bare bulb overhead, and shelves covered in sawdust and forgotten things. But it was clean, dry, and it didn't smell like mildew or engine oil. He set Emma's drawing on the windowsill, right where the morning light would hit it. Then he sat on the cot and let out a long breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding for years. Downstairs, Claire was tucking Lucy into bed. The girl clutched her dinosaur tight, but her eyes weren't as wary as before. "Will he stay?" Lucy asked, her voice a whisper. Claire brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. "I don't know. Maybe. He's fixing things." Lucy thought. For a moment, then whispered, "He fixed the leg of the dinosaur table." Claire smiled. "He did. Maybe he can fix our house too." Claire paused. "You think it's broken?" Lucy nodded, eyes wide. "It's been quiet too long." Claire kissed her daughter's forehead. "Then maybe it's time we made a little noise." Back in the loft. Ethan sat by the window holding a cup of water and watching the sky change color. The stars began to appear, just a few at first, tentative and scattered. Below, the workshop lights glowed through the slats of the blinds, a soft hum of life, a reminder that he wasn't entirely alone anymore. He thought of Emma, her laugh, the way she said "Dad" like it was a secret only they shared. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small notepad. On the first blank page, he wrote 3 words. "Not just visiting." Then he closed the book, turned off the lamp, and lay, back on the cot. Outside, the wind slowed. Inside, for the first time in years, Ethan Moore slept in a place that wasn't just shelter. It was the beginning of something that felt like staying. The knock came just after sundown. Not the polite kind, the kind that said, "I don't care who's behind that door. I'm coming in either way." Ethan was upstairs in the loft adjusting the space heater when he heard it. The rhythm of the fist on wood was too heavy, too certain. like it had knocked before. He paused, listening. Then Claire's voice, from downstairs, calm, but tight. "Lucy, go to your room." Ethan stood. He didn't know how long he'd been, waiting to hear her voice like that, low, flat, full of fear hidden under habit. But now that it was real, he moved. Fast. By the time he reached the kitchen, Lucy was already out of sight. Claire stood near the front door, one hand resting on the counter, her body still. Too still. Outside the glass pane, a man leaned in. Black. Coat, greasy hair, smile like a blade. Claire didn't open the door, but she didn't move either. "Claire," Ethan said quietly. She didn't look at him. "It's him," she said. "It's Thomas." The name dropped like ice into the room. Ethan stepped closer. "You want me to answer it?" She finally turned. Her face was pale, but there was steel in her voice. "No. Let him see I'm not alone." Thomas knocked again, louder this time, then rapped his knuckles on the window. "Claire, come on. Don't be dramatic. I just want to talk." Claire crossed her arms. "You were told not to come back." Ethan stood at her side now. Not in front of her, not behind, just beside. Thomas's eyes narrowed when he saw him. Well, looks like you've found yourself a replacement already." Ethan didn't speak, but his posture said enough. He wasn't moving. Thomas laughed, but there was no humor in it. "So this is the guy, huh? What's the plan, Claire? He play handyman while you hide behind old boards and soft lights?" Claire's voice was clear now. "You're not welcome here." Thomas leaned closer to the glass. "And what if I'm not asking?" Ethan stepped forward. One step. He didn't yell, didn't threaten, just said, low and even. She said go. Thomas stared at him for a long moment. Then he smiled, slow, cruel. "I'll be back," he said. "You know me. I always come back." And then he turned and walked into the dark. After he was gone, the silence came down like a curtain. Claire sat down slowly at the table. Her hands were trembling, just enough to make the water in the glass beside her ripple. Ethan stood near the door for a long moment, watching, thinking. Then finally, he spoke. "How long since the last time?" Claire's eyes flicked up. 8 months. We had a restraining order, but he's slippery. Always just on the edge of legal. Did you tell the sheriff? I did. He's helpful, but the law only works when it shows up in time. Ethan nodded, jaw tight. Claire stared at her hands. I hate that he can still do this. Just appear. Just stand there and make everything feel like it's going to fall again. It's not, Ethan said. Quiet. Firm. She looked up at him, something old and raw behind her eyes. You don't know what it's like, Ethan, to always be on alert, to wonder if the lock's good enough, if the noise outside is wind or something worse. I spent years trying to build a home that didn't creak at night. Ethan didn't interrupt, he let her speak. I left everything. Started over from a suitcase. Raised Lucy with no roadmap. I really thought I was done looking. Over my shoulder. He took a slow breath, then walked to the table and set a small object in front of her. A wood carving. Something simple. A square tile. He'd been working on it that afternoon. He hadn't planned on giving it to anyone. On it, one word. Stay. Claire stared at it. I'm not just here to fix cabinets, he said. She nodded once, barely, her throat moving. That night, Ethan didn't sleep in the loft. He slept downstairs, near the door. He didn't say anything about it. Claire didn't ask. But Lucy woke up around midnight and found him sitting in the chair, facing the window. She walked over in her pajamas, holding her dinosaur, blinking up at him. Is he gone? She whispered. Ethan nodded. He's not coming in. Lucy looked at him a moment longer, then climbed up into his lap without a word. She curled there, like she'd done it 100 times, Not once. And Ethan sat in that chair, holding someone else's child, guarding someone else's door with a quiet promise in his chest he hadn't known he was capable of making. No one else was going to break this house. Not again. The snow came fast, not in gentle flurries but in waves, sharp, sideways, relentless. By mid-afternoon the roads were nearly gone, swallowed by wind and white. Claire stood by the window, her phone in her hand. No bars, no signal. The storm had knocked out the power an hour ago. The backup generator hummed faintly in the basement, but the lights had dimmed to a soft, flickering amber. Lucy sat on the rug by the fireplace, wrapped in 2 blankets, reading a dinosaur book by flashlight. She didn't know it yet, not really, but something in her posture said she could sense it. The world was about to change again. Claire turned to Ethan. He was checking the windows, locking the back door, stacking firewood by the hearth. Quiet, efficient, calm. But his eyes weren't calm. They were watching, listening, bracing. "I don't like this," Claire said, voice low. "I know," Ethan replied. She walked closer, arms crossed tightly. "I keep thinking about what he said. I always come back. He won't get through me." She looked up at him. "That's what scares me." Ethan paused. "Why?" "Because I don't want you to get hurt for something that isn't yours." He met her eyes, steady and certain. "It is mine." Claire blinked. Once. Then he said it. The thing he hadn't let himself say until now. "You are." The first sound came just before nightfall. Not the storm, not the wind. Boots. On snow. Ethan turned toward the front door. Claire scooped Lucy into her arms, heart already thudding too loud to hear. Ethan moved quickly, not rushed, not panicked, just ready, like a man who had built a house with his bare hands and was prepared to stand in the doorway until it stopped shaking. A knock. One, then another, then a voice. "Claire, open the door." "Thomas?" His voice was slurred, either drunk or trying to sound more in control than he was. Claire backed up, holding Lucy tighter. Ethan looked at her. "Upstairs, lock the door, don't open it for anyone but me." She hesitated. "Ethan, go." Claire moved. Ethan reached for the fireplace poker. Not much of a weapon, just solid iron, heavy, cold in his grip. He opened the front door. Thomas stood there, snow in his hair, wild in the eyes. "You think you can take my place?" He sneered. Ethan didn't speak. "You think you can just show up, fix a few things, and suddenly you belong?" "I'm not here to replace anyone," Ethan said. "I'm here because they're worth standing in front of." Thomas laughed, sharp and mean, then lunged. Ethan didn't wait. He stepped forward, using the poker like a lever, not a weapon, knocking Thomas back, not out. "I won't let you inside," he said, panting. "You want to fight? Fine, but you do it out here, where the snow can bury your pride." Thomas swung, wild, angry. His fist clipped Ethan's shoulder. Pain flared hot. But Ethan didn't fall. Not this time. He stayed upright. He stayed put. Because the man Ethan used to be, the one who ran, who disappeared, one and was gone, and the man standing here, he was staying. They grappled, slipped, fell into the snow. The storm howled around them like a witness that didn't care who won. Thomas cursed, rolled, tried to swing again, but Ethan grabbed his coat collar, yanked him down, and pinned him. His voice came through the wind like stone. "You don't get to come back here. You don't get to scare her anymore," Thomas growled. "And who are you to say that?" Ethan leaned close. "I'm the man who stayed." The sheriff arrived 20 minutes later. Apparently someone from town had called when they saw Thomas's truck parked outside in the storm. Claire came down after it was over. Lucy stayed upstairs asleep, finally safe enough to dream. Ethan sat by the fireplace, his arm bruised, his lip split, his shirt torn. But he was breathing, and the fire was warm. Claire knelt beside him. I told you not to get hurt, she whispered, wiping the blood from his cheek. I told you I wasn't going anywhere, he replied, voice hoarse. And then, without drama or fear, she leaned in and wrapped her arms around him, not like he was broken, but like he was home. Outside, the storm moved on. Inside, Ethan Moore sat with the weight of a child's drawing in his chest and the knowledge that when danger came, he didn't run. He stood, and something in him, something buried long ago under ash and silence, stood with him. It started with smoke, not the kind from the fireplace, not the soft, woodsy kind that curled through a warm room and made it feel like home. No, this was different, sharp, chemical, wrong. Ethan woke to it instantly, bolting upright in the loft, heart already racing, outside the window, orange light pulsing low against the trees. Inside, a thin haze creeping under the door, the workshop was on fire. He didn't think. He just moved. Down the stairs, barefoot, ignoring the sting of heat through the soles of his feet. Claire's voice echoed faintly through the hallway. Panicked, calling Lucy's name, he found them by the front door. Claire wrapped in a blanket, Lucy clinging to her side, eyes wide and wet with smoke and fear. I've got her, Ethan said, lifting Lucy into his arms. You get out now. Claire didn't argue. They ran. Outside, snow still clung to the edges of the yard, but it was melting fast beneath the roar of fire. The back half of the workshop was already gone, flames licking up the wood Claire had spent a decade shaping with her hands. The attic, the loft, the cot, the little shelf with Emma's drawing, all of it, gone. Neighbors started to arrive, pulled by the glow. Someone called the fire department, but the road was iced over. It would take time they didn't have. Ethan stood in the snow, Lucy still in his arms, watching the building collapse into itself. Claire was on her knees, one hand pressed to her mouth, the other reaching out, not toward the flames, but toward something only she could see. Everything she had built. Everything she had kept safe. Burning. No one spoke for a long time. The fire roared, the snow hissed, and Ethan stood still, because if he moved, he might come apart. When it was over, the sun was beginning to rise. Pale light stretched across blackened wood and still steaming beams. The scent of ash coated everything. Claire sat on the porch steps, wrapped in Ethan's jacket. Her face streaked with soot and tears. Ethan sat beside her. Lucy was asleep upstairs in a neighbor's guest room. Finally safe. Claire didn't cry anymore. She just stared. He reached into his pocket, pulled out something that hadn't burned, the only thing he'd had time to grab on his way out, the carved wooden tile. Still, he placed it in her hand. She looked at it like she'd forgotten it existed. I thought I was done with this part, she whispered. Ethan stared out, at the rubble. The part where it all falls down? She nodded. He was quiet a moment. Then, sometimes it has to fall to find out what holds. Claire closed her eyes, exhaled, and said the thing he hadn't expected. I don't know how to start over again. He turned to her. You don't have to. Not alone. She opened her eyes. They weren't full of hope. Not yet. But they weren't empty either, and that was something. The sheriff came by at dawn. Said it looked like arson. Said Thomas had left town overnight. Said there'd be an investigation. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was the silence that came after. What mattered was the cold air on their skin and the ache in their chests. What mattered was the way Ethan reached for Claire's hand, not tightly, not desperately, but steadily, a quiet promise without words. I'm still here. That night, Ethan slept in the back room of the bakery across the street. The owners had offered, no questions asked. Claire and Lucy took the upstairs apartment. The walls were thin, the beds creaked, but it was dry, it was warm, and it wasn't ash. Ethan lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound, of footsteps above, not pacing, just moving, living. And for the first time since the fire, he let himself feel the weight of the loss, the loft, the shelf with Emma's drawing, the smell of wood dust and coffee and the soft creak of the bench he'd repaired, gone. But so were the days of him running. This time, he was still here, not out of guilt, but out of choice. And somehow, that made all the difference. The first to arrive was Mrs. Ellery. No one asked her to come. She simply showed up at sunrise, coat buttoned to the chin, a box of cinnamon rolls in one hand and a thermos of coffee in the other. Her husband had been a carpenter, before arthritis, before he passed. She didn't say, "I'm sorry," didn't ask what happened. She just placed the box on the porch of the bakery's back door and said, "He'd have wanted me to help with the framing when it's time." Then she left. By midday, more came. The sheriff brought over a space heater and a folding table. Jake from the gas station offered use of his tools. Even Callie, the high school art teacher who rarely spoke above a whisper, brought a pile of extra blankets and said, "They're clean." No one asked questions. They just came, with saws, with nails, with bread, with old coats for Lucy and Ethan and Claire, with presents. Claire stood at the edge of the burned-out workshop, arms wrapped around herself, watching as Ethan and 3 neighbors worked to clear the debris. He didn't talk much, just moved, with purpose, not anger. Each plank removed, each bucket of ash carried out was an act of quiet defiance. Ethan wasn't rebuilding the way a man starts over. He was rebuilding like a man who finally believed he belonged. That afternoon, Lucy toddled out from the bakery kitchen with a folded piece of paper in her hands. She tapped Ethan's leg until he turned. He knelt, and she handed it over. 3 stick figures, a small green tree in the middle. The word "soon" scrawled in crayon above it. He blinked hard. Claire stood behind her daughter, watching. "She wanted to draw the new place," she said. Ethan looked at Lucy. "You think we'll plant a tree?" Lucy nodded. "We can name it." He smiled. "We will." The next morning, Claire joined the cleanup. She wore work gloves 2 sizes too big and boots that had seen better days. But she showed up. By noon, she was shoulder to shoulder with Ethan, loading salvaged bricks into a wheelbarrow. They didn't speak much. Not because there was nothing to say, but because the work said enough. Dust coated their clothes. Sweat ran along their spines despite the cold. But they moved like they were building more than walls. They were building something sacred, not a house, not a shop, a future. That night, the townspeople gathered around the fire pit outside the bakery. Someone brought marshmallows. Someone else made soup. Claire sat on a folding chair. Lucy curled up in her lap, fast asleep. Ethan sat next to them, hands bandaged, back sore, but soul lighter. Mrs. Ellery passed him a mug of cider and said, "You've got good shoulders. You hold things steady." Ethan nodded. "I used to run from things I couldn't carry." She smiled. "Well, now you're carrying all of us." He looked at Claire, her hair tucked behind one ear, soot still clinging to her cheek like a shadow she hadn't bothered to scrub away. She met his eyes, held them, not with desperation, not with pleading, but with trust. Real, heavy, earned. Before everyone left, Claire stood and cleared her throat. "I don't have words," she said. "Not polished ones, not fancy, just thank you." People murmured. "We lost a building," she continued, "but not a home, not our people. And what we build next won't be just mine. It'll be ours." Ethan looked around, at every fire, and for the first time in more than a decade, he didn't feel like a visitor in someone else's life. He felt anchored. He felt chosen, not for what he had been, but for what he was now. Later that night, he sat on the porch of the bakery, feet up on the railing, a mug of cooling tea in his hands. Claire joined him. No words. Just the silence of two people no longer afraid of what might come next. He handed her a carving. Fresh. The wood still warm from his hands. One word. Grow. She took it, held it to her chest like something sacred, and in the stillness of that early winter night, Ethan Moore finally understood. You don't have to start with blood to build a family. You just have to show up, stay, rebuild, together. It was early spring when they planted it. The snow had long melted, but the ground was still soft beneath their boots. Earth dark and damp, ready for something new. Ethan stood with his hands in his pockets, watching as Claire knelt in the grass, guiding Lucy's small hands around the slender trunk of the young sugar maple. "This spot okay?" Claire asked, looking up at him. Ethan nodded. "It's perfect." The tree would stand near the corner of the new workshop, a few feet from the porch, close enough that they'd see it through the kitchen window each morning. Still young, still fragile, but with room to grow, just like the three of them. The build had taken months. Neighbors brought boards. The sheriff showed up on Sundays with coffee and questions about measurements. Mrs. Ellery laid bricks like her arthritis didn't exist. Even the high schoolers pitched in, painting signs and sanding trim. Ethan handled the foundation, Claire handled the details, and Lucy handled the spirit of the thing, with her drawings taped to the walls, her giggles echoing through unfinished rooms, her hands often covered in paint she wasn't supposed to touch. They never once called it rebuilding the workshop. They just called it home. Inside the new kitchen, smaller than before, but warmer somehow, Ethan carved a narrow shelf beside the window. He placed 3 tiles on it in order: still, grow, stay. Claire added her own that morning, begin, and beneath them, Lucy placed one more, fresh from her little box of colored wood, us. Later that evening, they sat on the porch, watching the sky fade into soft amber and rose. Claire leaned against Ethan, her head resting on his shoulder. Lucy lay across their laps, sound asleep, her arms wrapped around the stuffed dinosaur she'd loved since the first day she met him. Ethan looked out at the maple tree. Its leaves were just beginning to unfurl, small, tender, the color of possibility. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something he'd been holding on to for a long time. Emma's drawing. It was worn now, faded in places, but the 3 stick figures still held hands beneath a crooked roof and a bright, smiling sun. He looked at Claire. "I thought this was gone," he said, "when the fire took the loft. I thought everything that reminded me of her had burned." Claire turned to him. "You saved it." He nodded. "Barely. Slipped it into my back pocket when I grabbed Lucy. I didn't even realize until days later." Claire reached over and placed her hand on top of his. "You didn't just save it," she said. "You lived it." He didn't speak for a moment, just looked at the drawing again, at the lines, the little house, the crooked sun. Then he folded it carefully, slid it back into his pocket and said, "I don't think I believe in forever. Not anymore." Claire nodded. "Me neither." He turned to her. "But I believe in every day." She smiled. "That's enough." The stars began to appear, faint pinpricks in a sky washed clean. The wind rustled the leaves of the promise tree. It wasn't big, not yet, but it stood, because someone had planted it, chosen it, watered it, stayed. Ethan closed his eyes, breathing in the night, the scent of new wood, cool air, family near enough to touch. And for the first time in a long, long time, he wasn't waiting for something to go wrong. He was just here, chosen, still, growing. Home. If this story touched something quiet in you, maybe a memory, maybe a hope, don't just scroll away. Leave a like to let us know you're here. Subscribe so you won't miss the next story that reminds us. Family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's who stays when the world falls apart.